Hello, welcome to the Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Matt Pintus, and today I'm talking to one of the most influential American documentary makers of our time, whose iconic Ken Burns effect transformed the way we view history. Ken Burns, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
My first question is, when did you first become interested in filmmaking and history?
My mother got cancer when I was 2 years old, and there was never a moment when we didn't know this just incredibly difficult, painful sort of Damocles was going to drop, and it did. When I was 11 years old, just a few months short of my 12th birthday. And after that, my father and younger brother and I, were trying to make a go of it. Very, very difficult. I think my father had some illnesses himself. Um, and but he let me stay up at night to watch movies, and we'd go out late at night, to the Cinema Guild for an 11 o'clock show on a school night. That was completely off the normal curfew he had. I remember sitting with him watching Sir Carol Reed's Odd Man Out with James Mason about the Irish troubles in the teens and the 20s of the 20th century. And my dad cried, and he had not cried when my mom was sick. He had not cried when she died, had not cried at the incredibly sad funeral, something that my friends pointed out and in the pejorative. And I realized then that this medium had given him a safe harbor. So somewhere in late 65, early 66, I just decided to become a filmmaker. And that meant Alfred Hitchcock or John Ford or Howard Hawks. And I ended up going to Hampshire College, a new and still experimenting college that had opened in 1970. I went in the fall of 71. And all the teachers there were social documentary still photographers that reminded me that there is as much drama in what is and what was as anything of the human imagination. And one of the films I worked on was a film about history. And the last shot of that film is all live cinematography at a living history museum, was a pan across a painting. And so, if you told me, woke me up at then and said, look, you're going to be doing this for the next 50 years, I would have gone, you're crazy. But I've been doing it for the last 50 years.
How did the idea for your breakout documentary Brooklyn Bridge come about?
Brooklyn Bridge came from an idea. My best friend was a book salesman. And one day when I was suffering from a bout of pneumonia, he threw this paperback trade edition of a book that was a hardcover called The Great Bridge, The Epic Story of the Building of the Brooklyn Bridge by David McCullough. And I read it in a gulp and said, we're going to do this. My colleagues thought I was out of my mind, but it was then the opportunity to try to make a story alive visually by going inside of photographs and paintings and drawings, but also to use live cinematography as a kind of timeless way, but also on the soundtrack to interrupt the traditional third-person narration with a chorus of voices, authentic sound effects that made those photographs sort of come alive, and period music. And it was sort of, that's it. That was the beginning of kind of a way into, and a lot of it had to do with my teachers at Hampshire had been mostly still photographers, not filmmakers, and that the DNA for me is the individual image, and it is not a plastic thing. It's something in which you try to will some story out of, try to squeeze a story. And a lot of it has to do with taking an old photograph and treating it like the feature filmmaker I wanted to be. That is to say, with a master shot, a long shot, a medium shot, a close shot, an extreme close-up, a tilt, a pan, a reveal, an insert of details from that photograph. And so I refilmed old still photographs as if they were alive. And it wasn't just looking at them, it was listening to them. Are the troops tramping? Are the workers yelling? Are the seagulls crowing in the harbor? Do you hear the tugboats? Do you hear the sound of the winches bringing up the sound of the big blocks of granite that were being lifted up to create the towers of the Brooklyn Bridge? That was different from what people were doing. And the greatest compliment I had, I'm sorry to digress so much, was at the premiere at the Brooklyn Museum, in which I'd set up the folding chairs, I'd brought the projector, I'd brought the reel, I'd unspooled the little the case of the projector, which was the external speaker, threaded the thing up and played it. And the first question was from a woman, said, where did you get those newsreels of the building of the Brooklyn Bridge? I said, ma'am, film was not invented. It was built between 1869 and 1883. It would not be till the next decade, the 90s, that film would exist. And she goes, and I said, maybe you think it's the footage we did that Thomas Edison took in the 1899 or 1900. She goes, no, no, no. I mean, when they're bringing the scows to the bridge and they're lifting up the blocks of stone. I said, ma'am, those were all still photographs. And she looked at me and she said, no, they weren't. And I thought, okay, you've won, give up, you know?
And physically, when you're filming that, are you there with your camera literally moving along the photograph?
You went to an archive, physically went to an archive, and you set up, much like our computer screen, you set up an easel with a block of wood and with a groove in it, and you put a metal sheet on it, and you took a photograph with the white archival gloves with magnets, and you hooked it up, and you had your camera with a fixed lens, not a zoom lens, because that gives too much, doesn't give you the sharpness that a prime lens does. And you then move the tripod up and you film for 15 seconds. If it's a tilt up an image, you know, you're using close-up attachments. As you get closer, we get up into something the size of my thumbnail, and that would fill the entire screen. But you would tilt up something and you'd hold it 10 seconds at the bottom, tilt for as long as you felt was necessary, hold at the top for 10 or 15 seconds, and then you can use it as either the bottom frame, the top frame, or more than likely the movement itself. And this is painstaking. And I spent, for my Civil War series, I spent 8 or 9 straight weeks, Monday through Friday, at the Library of Congress, the equivalent of sort of the British Library and the British Museum put together, and just filming a collection of still photographs of the Civil War over and over again, from early in the morning to late at night, and go home exhausted, repeat for weeks and weeks, 8 or 9 weeks.
I think I'm right in saying that when it was released, it was watched by over 40 million people, which was unheard of at the time for a documentary. How did that make you feel?
It changed my life. It's still the highest rated program. It's 34 years old next month, and it's still the highest rated. It's shown in schools when they're open, hundreds of times a day, not the whole thing, but a portion, 20 minutes or 40 minutes or whatever for a school class period, as are many, many of the other films. So it has this kind of life. And when a new film comes out, when we used to sell DVDs, that would take over for a quarter of two of the highest grosser, and then the Civil War would return. And it's really an amazing moment. And I think it's because it's the most important moment in American history. It's our founding, in a way, our revolution. Our revolution was, in fact, a civil war. There were at least a fifth of the population was loyalists, and there's lots of civilian deaths. There's very few civilian deaths outside of the state of Missouri and Kansas in our Civil War. It's a sectional war, North against South. And so we've mistaken it, and we've allowed in our thinking to make the Civil War bloody, or World War I or World War II or Vietnam bloody, subjects I've dealt with. But the revolution is held in amber as this sort of perfect time when great men thought great thoughts, and they don't understand it's this unbelievable diverse cast of characters: Native Americans, French Canadians, French soldiers and kings, and German princes and soldiers and their wives, and Brits, all of whom have lots of different points of view, from sympathetic to, absolutely adamant about it, generals, officers, ordinary men, as well as the variety of Americans here who are Native and who are women and who are, farmers and who are rich people and men thinking great thoughts and slave owners. And it's as complicated a story as I've ever undertaken, and happy to continue to try to bite off more than I could chew.
What I really want to talk about is the Ken Burns effect. Can you tell me about when you first got approached by Apple?
I got a call in November of 2002 from a person claiming to be Steve Jobs, my secretary said. And I, of course, didn't believe it. I picked it up, and it was Steve Jobs. And he said, look, I really love your work. Will you come and see me? I want to show you something. So I flew out to California. It was now December 2002. And he brings me in his office. We talked for a long time. We actually started a friendship. And then he led me in another room where there were 2 technical folks who had been working on this thing that allowed you to take your photographs and put them into the computer and pan and zoom on them. Very, just sort of rote way, just a little bit of a drift and a little bit of a dissolve to the next one, and you could add music, and they could add music for you if you didn't have a piece of music in mind. And I'm a bit of a Luddite, and I just I said, oh, great. I was like, this is interesting. And he said, so every Macintosh computer starting next January 1st, meaning 2003, all of them will have in perpetuity this thing. And we want to keep the working title. And I said, oh, really? What is it? And he said, The Ken Burns Effect. And I looked at him and I said, I don't do commercial endorsements. And he said, what? And the two engineers kind of blanched. He has a legendary temper, which I never saw. We were friends for the rest of his life. And I stayed at his house when I was ever in Silicon Valley. And he was an amazing human being. And so we marched me back into his room. We had a long conversation. I was trying to tell him the way in which I wish to be insulated from the transactional and the acquisitive in favor of the transformational and the things that would protect me. Just as I had moved physically from New York City and commerce to this little village, I also felt that I needed some insulation, and he got it. And so I walked out of there, and he had agreed to give me hundreds of thousands. I'm sure by now it's $1 million worth of hardware and software. And one or two of those computers stuck with us because we didn't have any in our office. And all the rest went to nonprofits. And so I could have that kind of, what do you want to call it, plausible deniability. And so, and the world is divided now. I have to say, Matthew, between those who said, oh, you should have asked for, a tenth of a penny every time it was used. I said, you don't know Steve Jobs. He would have called it the pan and zoom effect, and that was the last I heard of him.
How do you feel about the fact that your work has influenced people's understanding of history?
Late historian Stephen Ambrose said more Americans get their history from me than anybody else, which was a kind of cute thing to say. And people presume there's a pressure. It's really hard to make a film. It's really harder to make a good film. And it's just, almost impossible to make a great film. And all we want to do when we get up is make a great film. I want to put my head on the pillow tonight and saying, I made this film or that film, and we're always working on several at once, better. And so while you do have that exterior noise that is saying, are you saying that this is the defense? You go, no, I'm telling stories, and we're calling balls and strikes. It's super complicated. We're not, that to us is an American baseball term, which means that, if George Washington's got a positive thing going on at this moment in episode 2, but a negative thing a few pages later, both get equal weight. You just say, this is who it is. You don't throw somebody out with some unforgiving revisionism, nor do you subscribe to some treacly, top-down, ancient narrative that's old and creaky and needs to be retired. It's a vibrant and complicated scholarship, and we, as in every film, use the best scholars in the subject. We have a British historian, Stephen Conway, who has added immeasurably to our understanding of the American Revolution. There's a wonderful moment in the Battle of Bunker Hill, which is the first major battle in Boston, and Americans have the high ground, and so before they run out of ammunition, and the British Army and Hessians come up there. The slaughter, the attrition rate, the casualties, he said, will not be repeated until 1916 in the Somme for the British Army. And then you have somebody in one sentence just putting the context of this 18th century in, because there are no photographs, inaccessible, just paintings and whatever battles and whatever maps we can make. And all of a sudden you go, whoa, you mean the loss of British soldiers, and particularly officers, because they had different colored suits that were more vermilion than they were red coats. So the Americans knew to aim at the officers, and everybody but the Gage, the commanding general, around him was killed, and he's covered in blood, and it's a horrible battle, and Stephen Conway just made it come alive by saying the words 1916 and the Somme, and because you go, okay, so war can be that bad back then as well.
Okay, final question. Is there a topic on your bucket list that you think, oh, I still really, really want to do that? It's kind of been burning your pocket.
Oh yeah, for years, and somebody asked me that in the 1990s, and I said, oh, I want to do a film on Martin Luther King. Race is a central theme in my films, as it is in American life, as it must be obvious to those of you. It's a major theme in the life of your country as well. and I can count on the fingers of one hand and still have a couple of fingers left to snap it, those films that don't deal with race. And I wanted to do Martin Luther King, one of the most important people, but I knew the family was protective. And so we're still working on it. We're negotiating with the family. We've done interviews, many interviews with people who worked with him and knew him, not just famous people like the recently deceased Harry Belafonte or the Congressman John Lewis, whose famous image of being beat up in his rain jacket in Selma by policemen and dogs, who I got to know and was a friend. We did the last interview, I believe, before he passed away. But also ordinary folks who, picked King up at the Albany, Georgia airport and drove him to their house and fed him and then brought him to church the next day where he made a speech. And so we're sort of surrounding the subject and hope that in something that we can do. That's the only thing that I ever say would be a problem. Look, let me put this very bluntly. If I were given 1,000 years to live, and I will not, I would not run out of topics in American history.
That was documentary maker Ken Burns, and he was speaking to me, Matt Pintus, for Witness History. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the BBC World Service YouTube channel, and why not leave us a review while you're there? And if you're into history, why not check out our back catalogue of more than 1,000 Witness History episodes, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for watching.